Just like Ezra, I found it fascinating, but some of the people watching, particularly those who are maybe in Turkey, will not have had a chance to read this book. Can you start out by telling us a bit about what's in the book, the point of it, and what the steps you are seeing mean for Turkey and for the rest of the world?
Firstly, yes, it's a new book in academic standards, but it was actually published in 2019. For journalists, it's already a very old book, I think. I wrote it in Zagreb, where I am now since 4.5 years. After 2016 coup attempt, I came here and I stayed here. And when I was here, Zagreb is a very interesting place. It's an interesting location. You are like in midway between Europe and Turkey. So I was seeing both at the same time. So I knew what we had been through in Turkey, and I was observing that the beginnings of the same process was happening in European countries and United States. In 2016, Trump came to power and Brexit started happening. So I thought Europe and United States especially, and all the other countries actually who are subjected to authoritarian leaders or regimes are ready to hear what might happen to them as well. Because after seeing all, Europe and, Asia and United States, I couldn't stop myself seeing the commonalities of this rising right-wing populism in all these countries. So I decided to write a book about the common global patterns of right-wing populism. Many people thought, when I first published the book, many people, especially in Britain, thought that I am trying to compare the countries, whereas actually what I was trying to do was to to show the similarities to the societies, so they understand that we are all in this peril together. It's a global matter, and these leaders, these authoritarian regimes are learning from each other. So the message of the book is, why don't we do the same as the opposing, people or communities? So How to Lose a Country, the 7 Steps from Democracy to Dictatorship, actually tells about these 7 commonalities of authoritarian regimes today in the world. I do think that the new form of authoritarianism is pretty much different than we have been taught about Nazism and so on. So I wanted to identify and name this new form of fascism, if you will, so that people can recognize it before these regimes seize the ultimate power in their countries. So yeah, and the 7 steps are, well, it's a bit boring, this part of the conversation. It might get boring because these steps sound boring, but actually, the stories that accompany them make the book. The first step is create a movement. They all create a movement claiming claiming a political status which is above politics or beyond politics. They always promise to come to cure the politics or drain the swamp, as Trump said once. So yeah, and the second step is, let me have a look at my own book. Second step is disrupt the nation, terrorize the language. Thanks to social media now, the propaganda is not monopolized by states, but it has become a really messy job. So what they do while they are getting organized is they are disrupting the rationale. They are using the schizophrenic logic, if you will, to make it impossible to have a proper political conversation with them. And also they terrorize the language, and while doing it, they are polarizing the countries. Every country has sensitive or rather fragile consensuses, and these terrorizing the language and disrupting the rationale pretty much exploits those, those fragile consensuses. And the third one is remove the shame. I do think that the concept of post-truth has a lot to do with shame and how we experience shame in the 21st century. It also has a relation to 1990s, 1980s, where this world of split realities were built. And Stephen, you are far more experienced than me on this. Anybody who remembers the Bosnian War or invasion of Iraq, or especially invasion of Iraq, Baghdad bombardment and so on, they would remember that the screens were first, it was the first time that the screens were split into two. The stock market was, flowing down beneath the screen, and we were seeing the bombardment on the screen. So I think what we are going through now, what we call post-truth, was built from then on. So I do think that it is a moral issue, whereas many American and European journalists and intellectuals wanted to take this issue in a very technical and practical way. So I do think that it has moral, roots. So the fourth step is dismantling judicial and political mechanisms, which we unfortunately saw happening in the United States as well. It was interesting to see the Capitol Hill invasion. And to see that there was this delay in responding to that act. So this is thanks to Mr. Trump playing with dismantling the judicial and political mechanisms from the very beginning, for instance. And we have seen far worse version of it in Turkey. We're still experiencing it. And the fifth is design your own citizen. Every authoritarian regime designs its own citizen, but somehow every authoritarian regime starts this process with designing the women. Somehow they think that they are, women are Play-Doh, and they can, change them into something they want and put them in the window dressing of their political project. It's all about women, and we are all around the world, even in the most developed countries, we are seeing that the women's rights are under attack, and they are actually in retreat. So the sixth step is let them laugh at your horror. This chapter and this step, or this commonality, is mostly about how political humor turns from being a tool of resistance to a too comfortable shelter to go out from, especially for the opposition, and how this culture of cynicism and sarcasm actually is a sign of defeat and the admittance of the defeat. And the seventh and the last step is build your own country. It is where, in McCarthy's famous words, love it or leave it begins. You get rid of the population that does not approve you as the leader, and you build your own country that doesn't have any place in it for people like me. So hence I'm in Zagreb. Stefan, are you there? I think we lost him.
Here I am. So that was fascinating. Let me ask you to respond to this situation that I found myself in the other night. I was at a dinner party, and somebody was ranting and finally said, and then we get people like Erdogan, and then he pointed at me and he said, who you put in power.
Really? Did you? I didn't know that.
I said, you're right, I did, and I'm sorry, I apologize. I'll tell you what I think he meant. I think he meant that people like me, including Turks like me who are secular and democratic oriented, were always complaining during the 90s that the military dominance of government was so oppressive. Essentially, the generals could veto anything that the prime minister decided, anything that the parliament decided. You had this unelected group of officers that essentially made all the important decisions in the country. And people like me and my Turkish friends were saying, Turkey is ready for democracy. Turkey has grown up. We don't need to have a tutelary regime to look over what the parliament and the government does. But we were wrong. Or were we? Were we wrong when we said Turkey can handle democracy? What about Poland? Can Poland handle democracy? Can Hungary? Can the United States? And is there a larger question that is democracy very unnatural? Look all through human history. People have always chosen autocracy. It provides places and security for everyone. Democracy is so much more difficult. It's a very unnatural system. So are countries, I'm going to take Turkey as an example because I didn't cover Poland or Hungary or India or the Philippines, really ready to take on this responsibility? The Turks were given this gift of freedom from military rule. And what did it wind up with? It's what we have now. So were we wrong to rebel against military dominance? Would we be better off if Çevik Bir and the generals were still in charge?
Okay, there's so many things to tell after this, input. First of all, I have to say, you're not the first person who apologized in my presence, let's say, for earlier support of Erdogan. You know who was the other one, actually, that stayed with me for quite a long time? It was Bono, the rock singer, U2 Bono. He wanted to see me just to apologize for his early support in Ireland. So we had a drink and he apologized and he said, I was wrong, I didn't see it. But it wasn't you or Bono. I think it was this political climate. And by the way, it doesn't mean that I forgive you, by the way.
You shouldn't.
But because I was one of the early ones and it was so incredibly hard to explain what's happening in Turkey when the entire mainstream intellectuals in Europe or in the United States were telling me that this is democracy, why don't you like it? So I sounded like this person who wanted military rule whatsoever. That was the political climate then. And many people were carried away by that political climate. I think one of the things they did was to mix their wishes with their observations. And you're, at the end of the day, you are an American. Many Turkish intellectuals who could have done differently, they supported the regime. And in the book, I explain how they did it and what was the reason behind it. And I understand this dichotomy of either Erdogan or the army. And that dichotomy actually is the dichotomy dichotomy that is very diminishing. And how we ended up here is the question. How we ended up in this at this point where we ask, is democracy good at all? I think the main reason why we ask this question now is the fact that we removed social justice from democracy. And also we infantilize, not we, but the dominant culture and dominant politics, dominant ideologies infantilize the masses to a degree that they do believe that Pizzagate is serious. And they can go on to Capitol Hill thinking that they are making a revolution and so on. Actually, yesterday I was watching a HBO documentary about QAnon. And there were all these people. And I thought, this is what Cold War did to this entire planet. These women, these men, these idiotic people who thinks that there's this conspiracy theory that, includes everything, that connects everything and so on. This dominant ideology, dominant system, were so afraid of them becoming socialists. So they made them these, they stupefied them to that degree that they voted for Trump, a, pussy grubbing man. So it is, all this political crisis turn into a moral crisis as well. That is why we are now asking, maybe it's not democracy we're looking for. Well, it is, and we cannot even think about otherwise, because it means that we are defeated as humanity if we ask that question. And one of the reasons we cannot ask that question is the current state of democracy is not convincing. It is not keeping its promises. If you ask me, the fundamental contract of neoliberalism is pretty much damaging the fundamental contract of democracy, which is equality, which is, one man, one vote, and, both political equality and social equality. So if we can do that, if we can put back the idea of social justice as an integral part of democracy, I think then we can talk about, then we can really ask, do we want democracy? And the answer would definitely be yes, right?
I'm not sure. Isn't it normal that ultimately when people are elected and create governments based on what they feel inside, the first thing they're going to want to do is crack down on minorities, people that are not like us. And then they want to remove social justice from people who are not like us. You're in Croatia. I was there when Croatia became independent, thanks to Hans-Dietrich Genscher. And there were other Europeans who were saying, do not recognize Croatian independence until Croatia guarantees the rights of its minorities. That didn't happen, and the terrible war was the result. So isn't it a normal impulse in democracy, because it's inside human beings, to want to use your power to exclude others? And isn't that an inherent weakness of democracy?
No, not at all. I think you're being the devil's advocate a little bit. But if we degrade democracy to to the ballot boxes, to the leader, to the government, or to the party politics, of course, the ending would be something like Turkey or worse than that. But democracy is not only that. Democracy is freedom of press, freedom of expression, freedom of organization, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so one of the reasons that diminishing democracy to ballot boxes is that because people are not given the chance to exercise their right. But then if you ask me, if people are really willing to use their political rights as much as we'd like to think them do, I don't think so. But then it is also the consequence of the fact that politics was declared dirty and nonsense and boring for quite a long time, especially after the end of 1970s. Okay, let's put it this way. When Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan said there is no alternative, and that motto became the dominant understanding of politics in today's world, they left no alternative for people, and people start thinking that, okay, there's no alternative. So we do not have to get politicized, we do not have to get organized, and also we have no impact. If you ask me, today the biggest problem on this planet is the fact that people lost their faith in themselves and in their political selves. That is why one of the reasons for democracy to decline is this: they do not want to be part of that, which they consider completely dirty, the politics. I don't know, what do you think?
I think you're absolutely right that you cannot reduce democracy down to voting, down to the ballot box. And especially we see it in the United States, where the choices you're presented with when you go in to vote are actually very limited.
Yeah.
I remember when the Shah of Iran created an opposition party, and they used, the joke was that the names of the two parties were the party of yes and the party of yes, sir. But it was considered a democracy.
I think this was in All the Shah's Men, right? In the book.
Sounds good. Yeah, I like that book.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. You've written a lot about the advance of right-wing populism, and you're picking out the stages that it goes through to consolidate itself. Is this also true of left-wing populism? You've written favorably about Venezuela. How do you see that end of the spectrum? Is that comparable, or is that a completely different phenomenon?
You know what? I knew that you were going to ask this question. When this question asked, well, we are online now. We're at our places, but when this question is asked in United States or in Britain, it makes a different sense to me. But it's when it's asked in Mexico or by Mexicans, let's say, or Venezuelans, it makes a different sense. I'm a social democrat, so this is what I am. So I don't consider those self-proclaimed leftists as leftists anyway. But populism, if you ask me, in its very essence is this: mobilizing and organizing the ignorant masses towards towards a political choice that is against their interest. So when I define populism like this or authoritarianism like this, then of course there can be left-wing populism as well, or self-proclaimed leftist people can do that as well. Yeah, that's it. And in Mexico, we have been experiencing this, especially in Spain. I was in Madrid a few days ago, and I saw how people hated Podemos because of corruption and so on. And when I see that, I think, you know, one of the very few hopes of humanity is lost because of these stupid people who are doing stupid things. But yeah, you're right. There can be a left-wing populism as well. And I was in Venezuela, actually, sorry. I was in Venezuela in 2000, well, when Chavez came to power, and I wrote a book about it. And I saw people, what they wanted and what Chavez did. It's actually very interesting. And that was the first time I actually saw a leader turning to an authoritarian figure, because when I was there, people were mobilized, you know, they were believing in this thing that they were, you know, going through, and they were believing in a revolution. And 2 years later, I was on a panel with the Venezuelan ambassador, and the Venezuelan ambassador was telling that it was Chavez who all of a sudden went to the mountains and sweared on the Bible that he's going to make a revolution, and then he did the revolution. You know, I saw it happening before my eyes, how an authoritarian leader stole, because he's leftist, he stole the hopes and the faith of people. And that was quite heartbreaking, actually.
So were you wrong about Venezuela like I was wrong about Turkey, or not?
I didn't support Chavez. I was supporting the people, so I don't accept that I am.
Okay. Now let me ask you about another international aspect of this phenomenon. One of the things that tends to accompany rising autocracy, and we've seen it in the United States, which has in many ways been an autocratic state for a long time, is the desire to expand your international influence and to believe that your borders are too small. We've already seen the Hungarian leaders now saying that there are places in other countries nearby, they have Hungarian populations, that should really be part of Hungary. We're seeing now this very dramatically in Turkey, where Turkey has essentially is invading Syria, has tried to seize a part of Syria, and Erdogan has talked about how Mosul in Iraq actually should be part of Turkey, and we got to reopen the whole negotiations that led to the formation of Turkey in the Ataturk era, because Turkey needs to be much bigger. Do you see a logical connection between the rise of an authoritarian leader and the desire to push towards other countries and expand one's influence beyond the region that one governs?
Absolutely, because they need an enemy. They need to make great promises, and all of them have this idea of greatness. It's in the book as well, and that greatness sometimes stand upon this glorious past, sometimes depend upon this, you know, this fantastical ideas about future. So Erdogan, like many other leaders, Orban or Trump or whatever, like all the leaders, or Boris Johnson even, have this idea of greatness, and that greatness should be refreshed. The promise of greatness should be refreshed every time. And in terms, regarding Erdogan, he's so stuck with several troubles. So he has, this is very painful to say, by the way, and I'm really afraid of this. But yeah, this is his only way to wage a war that would make him look like a real, like this glorious leader. So yeah, it is a thing. They have to invent the other, and when there is no other, they have to come up with a other that is the evil that should be attacked, and so on. This is, yes, this is also a commonality that I didn't talk about in the book because it seemed so unreal, but now it's becoming real. Like a Cassandra for me, I'm like, even for a Cassandra like me, it seemed unreal when I was writing the book in 2018. But now things are getting even worse than I imagined, I think.
Now let me ask you, you say they are looking for an enemy. Is that enemy always to be found in another country, or is sometimes the enemy found within?
Well, you're looking at one of them now. Yeah, the enemy is now, lately, after Boğaziçi University incident, dean was, for those who don't know the issue, a dean was appointed against the will of the university staff and the students, and he's a apparatchik, I can say, of the party of Mr. Erdogan. And after that, there was a big resistance at the university. So during that resistance, the LGBTQ plus people became the enemy. And then a few days ago, Turkey pulled out from Istanbul Convention that protects women against violence. And while the public affairs guy from the government trying to tell why they did this, he was telling that the homosexuals were hijacking the Istanbul Conventions, and homosexuality is not a good thing or whatever, it's not healthy, or it's against the family values and traditional values and so on. So even if they cannot find, when they cannot find it outside, of course there's always something inside. And now there are the Kurds and pro-Kurdish party HDP. There's a case, they're trying to shut down the party and so on. So yeah, I'm like, there are lots of enemies, and it's easy in Turkey to do that, as you know, Stephen. It is easy because there are a lot of minorities, there are a lot of contradictions. It's a very colorful country when you look from a perspective. When you look from another perspective, it's a there are fragilities, let's say, within the society that can be exploited. So such regimes exploit such fragile compositions, let's say.
One thing I've always observed about the Turkish political scene is that true opposition is very hard to get started. There's never been a real social democratic party with any strength in Turkey. There have been several efforts, and needless to say, the government has made repeated efforts to crush leftist thought. After the 1980 coup, so many universities were cleansed of all forward-looking or open-minded professors. A whole generation was the result of that. But why is it that the opposition in Turkey is so weak, or is it not so weak? Is the İmamoğlu movement, or can some of these other dissidents who broke away from Erdogan come together? What do you see as the future? And maybe you can also talk a little bit about your most recent book, which is an attempt to look at the future.
Yeah. Well, the opposition is weak because we have been through one of the most brutal military coups of modern world history in 1980, as you well know. And after that, it wasn't back to democracy, although you might think otherwise. It was the continuation of that military rule in a democratic environment. So, so Erdogan and his party was not actually a coincidence, or it wasn't a surprise. These were the people, the Sunni Islamist nationalist communities, those organizations were the one that were supported, that were not really entrenched as much as leftists did. I don't know if you know this, but there's a joke in Turkey. Whenever there's a coup, this joke is always around. It doesn't matter who makes the coup; it's always the leftists who get imprisoned at the end. So, which happened in the last coup attempt as well in 2016. So, for generations, this leftist movement, or the progressives, I should say, progressives have been either exiled, tortured, imprisoned, or they were counted as outcasts in general. So it wasn't, it isn't a surprise that the opposition is not that powerful. Still, though, Turkey has been the stage for one of the biggest uprisings in last few decades. I think Gezi uprising in 2013 was quite phenomenal, and I think it still lingers. That mood is still lingering in the politics as well. That's why Ekrem İmamoğlu, the new Istanbul mayor, who is from the opposition party, is so strong, or the new opposition mayors and so on. What I see for the future is this: two things. And this is not only for Turkey, by the way, the first one. I do think that the cities, the cosmopolitan cities, will be the hotspot for the new politics, for the new progressive politics. Because as we know, since the World Social Forum, or since Tahrir, let's say, the world is trying to form a new way of organization, and they are trying to list their demands from the future, the progressives. But these new political organisms could not really form themselves. And even if they do form themselves, they cannot adapt to the party system, to the parliamentarian system, to the centrist democratic system. So I do think that this political energy, these new political organisms, as I call it, they will gather around these cities like London, Istanbul, or New York. So we're going to be seeing something there in the coming 10 years, if you ask me. And the second thing, this is for Turkey, but it might also be for other countries as well, even for United States. I think the women, and I'm not saying this because I'm a woman or because I want this to happen, but I think the women will be leading the way for a more horizontal administration, for a more horizontal politics without hierarchy. Not without, but less hierarchy. So these are the two openings I see for the future: political future and also social future. And the new book is, I have a proof copy here. It's an early reading copy. The book is coming out in May. It's called Together. It is very yellow, as you can see, because I want it to be yellow. It's 10 choices for a better now. Stephen, it is not politics, or it's a politics in a different sense. It's a little bit philosophy in it, because I thought that after being subjected to such a massive political and moral evil, because of the rising authoritarianism, or because of the loss of faith in humankind, because of the general mess in our understanding of the world, in our understanding of the self, I thought that we have to start thinking about the new human. How should we be in 21st century in order to create a new politics, in order to create the new societies? Because we are in a pretty interesting historical situation. It is not only political, national and international political institutions crumbling, but also societies are disintegrating. And you are experiencing this in the United States as well, this extreme polarization. Even Trump is, after Trump is gone, that specter of him is still haunting, because there's still that polarization in the society. And it is far more so for Turkey and for India, for Britain, and so on. So as societies crumble, we have to find a new narrative, new perspective to be together. That's why the book is called Together. Can we be together? That's my question, actually. And that's what I try to answer. So I'd be happy if you could read it when it's out in May. But yeah, this is the question. And one of the things that is most central to the book is the lost faith in our own kind, because I think that is the most important thing in today's world. It's not climate crisis, it's not, you know, political crisis, it is the loss of faith. Because I'm looking at 1970s, where people believed that they had individual impact, they could have individual impact on what happens in the world, whereas today, we don't feel it. Yesterday, I tweeted something like, I cannot decide whether either I'm going to hold the world by the collar and say, get your fucking self together, or I'm going to lock myself in a really big library. I think most of the people feel the same thing now. Either they're going to revolt or they're going to retreat forever. I don't know. How do you feel?
I can tell you that what you said reflects my own experience, because I can remember as a kid, like many of the people that I grew up with and my generation in the United States, believed two things. First of all, we believed that the world was, with some back and forth, getting steadily better. And secondly, that we could do something to help it get better. I'm not so sure that the younger people today have that same feeling. We might have been wrong, but at least it was a good feeling. And it's sad to see a generation growing without that.
No, it's a very important feeling, because it creates a new, a different reality. You know what? I always wanted to write a novel about American Peace Corps. When I say this, it gives me creeps, because it is a different kind of understanding of America and what America is about. My mother was educated by an American Peace Corps, you know, person, like very young person, and she still talks about it. So that was a different America, and they were changing things. You see, you know, your generation, this is your generation, basically.
Well, I've got my 12 other questions, but I have a feeling there's a few other people out there that might want to get into our conversation. So let me ask Esra if you would like to take over and moderate the questions coming in from the other listeners.
Professor Kinzer, let's see if there is any question in the audience, and if there is not, then we can continue with your questions. And then, okay, you know, is there any, if you want to ask a question, please use the raise hand button. And then
there is this Kate Creasy.
Yeah.
Great. So thank you for joining us today at Brown. I've been reading your work for over a decade and deeply appreciate the courage and conviction with which to write and the sort of moral vision of the world that you offer. I wanted to pick up on sort of, in some ways, this question about, you know, a different America. I myself work on Turkey. I work on Turkey in the aftermath of the 1980 coup, and I'm really curious sort of what you would make of the Biden administration. And in particular, I think they've been quite open about their belief that we, and anytime anybody invokes we, I think it's important to kind of put some quotes around that, that we are in a global war to reestablish the security of democracy in the face of rising authoritarianism. So do you think that having somebody in the White House who claims to be so actively pro-democracy will change the way the Erdogan regime in Turkey and other authoritarians like Aliyev in Azerbaijan, for that matter, respond to international pressure over their human rights record? Or have international norms been so changed by the last 4 years and the rise of China as a global power that the rhetorical weight of Washington no longer matters as much on the international stage? I think, in other words, what I'm trying to get at is, in your opinion, does the Biden administration offer a new energy to pro-democracy, anti-fascist struggles internationally? Or are his words rather a kind of, let's say, last gasp of the so-called post-World War II human rights-based international order?
I think you pretty much answered your own question there. A friend of mine, when things were really crazy in Turkey in 2010, when we didn't really understand what was happening and everybody was, the Western media was telling that this is real democracy, enjoy it, and we were sensing that things are not getting well and so on. This friend of mine, when things were really, really crazy, he said, you know what, we should shut down the country for like 3 months. And we should eat bread, cheese, and tomato. And we should think what we're going to do. I think Biden administration is pretty much that. Let's just settle down for a while. Let's take a breath, because this was really a roller coaster, what we have been through for the last 4 years. And I cannot talk very much about Biden's administration because I am not really an expert on American politics. I just see the outer lines, the outline of what's happening. But today it was interesting to watch Euronews because an American envoy, I think, a representative of NATO from the United States was in Europe. And the presenter was saying, after 4 years of Trump, now they're going to renew the thing. So most of the stuff, most of the politics is now running on, can we do all the things? Can we undo all the things that Trump did? So, and he said it in his inaugural speech, it's a healing period. But towards where, I don't know. Of course, I wish Bernie Sanders was more active in this new government, but I think that Bernie Sanders, the left of the Democrats, are pretty much acting like a bearing, both political and moral. So as soon as the left of the Democrats, the leftists in the Democratic Party, stay there and hold on to their power, I think they would balance out the extreme centrist politics of Biden. Biden is a different generation. And yeah, I think, this is a new world. By the way, if you didn't read, I think 11th of March, New Yorker issue, there's a great article about the difference between the Chinese and American imperialism. I think you'd enjoy it. It's a very long essay about the difference. So it's very good. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
I see that Sibel Uzun has a question as well, so I'm going to let her know.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for.
Oh my God.
I know.
I'm sorry, but I have to tell this. Are you in LA, or where did I see you? Oh my God, I remember you.
You saw me in Los Angeles at your book reading.
Yeah, and I've been trying to remember your name for such a long time. Thank you, Sibel, for being here. Oh my God, you don't know what you gave me now.
I'm sorry for the appearance. It's work hours and I'm kind of stuck here. But thank you. It was a great insight. I wanted to ask that you said after you wrote the book from 2018 to now, the world has changed greatly, and even you are yourself surprised with everything. And with your chapter about the women in your book, and now with Turkey being backed up on Istanbul agreement, would you consider writing a book about how women as a woman, how women should shape the politics, or how we should respond, or do you have any personal beliefs on how women should respond on those political stances?
Thank you, Sibel, and thank you again for being here. You don't know how many people I asked about you. Anyway, yeah, interesting. There's a chapter about women in the book, but actually it's not about women. This new book I'm talking about, Together, the chapter is called Choose Strength Over Power. So I talked about what is the difference between strength and power, and how women actually are inclined to show strength and not power. And this can be a new lead to a new political thinking as well. So in that sense, there's a lot about women in the book, obviously, because I've been writing about women for quite a long time. But I am thinking about writing a new novel that is about women. It's a woman's story, let's say, but it's not ripe enough to even mention. So I'll leave it at that. But there's a chapter solely on women, but about power, the difference between power and strength. So I hope you like it. And it's so nice to see you here.
Okay, let's see. I cannot see any other hands. You see, please let me know if you see any other hands. And let's see. I think we're all set for the timing. Professor Kinzer, if you have any more questions to ask to Ece, I think we still have some more time.
Great. Let me ask you this, Ece. One thing I noticed in Turkey is that Turkey's at some kind of an extreme on the spectrum of self-examination. Asking yourself as a country, who are you? What have you done? Take yourself out of your own personal perspective and try to look honestly at your situation and what your history is, what you've done, what you've been. When I moved from Turkey back to the United States, I found another country that actually is very bad at self-examination, and that is the United States. Americans, in this sense, very much like Turks. They don't look in the mirror as a nation and ask themselves, who are we really, and what have we done, and why is it that people resent much of what we've done? We never ask that. Why is it that some nations, or maybe it's not just some nations, like some individuals, are so reluctant to look into the mirror and ask themselves whether they bear any responsibility themselves for the problems they face?
Okay, here's a disappointing answer. The answer of despair, I think. A nation or a person is always reluctant to look herself unless she's forced to do it. I mean, like, the only nation we know who really looked at herself and still does is Germany, right? Because they were defeated. So I think it's a power game there. If you're powerful enough, you don't have to examine yourself. I mean, like, you can even, observe this in the, in the office relations as well. The powerful can be tactless, can be ruthless, can be careless. Actually, that's the word I'm looking for, careless. We are not Turkey is not powerful enough to be careless. And I don't actually agree with you when it comes to examining herself so diligently. I do not think that we are doing that. We are running away from doing that. I wrote a book, Deep Mountain, about this, about Armenian-Turkish issue. And I saw how people found or invented these extremely sophisticated ways of not realizing, not looking at the facts. So yeah, I think it's about power there. Actually, I have a question for you. Stephen. May I?
Please. I'm not, usually I'm the one asking, but in this case, I think I'm willing to make an exception.
No, since you're here, actually, I could have interviewed you because I would love to actually. Do you think, I feel like the specter of Trump is still haunting the White House. Somehow he's still there, even if he's not there. Do you think, is he a specter still haunting the White House, the political establishment?
Definitely. I think he's the power broker in the Republican Party. If you want to be the next presidential candidate, you're probably going to have to get past Trump. He's going to have to approve you. Also, when I saw what was happening in the Capitol, and when I watched the whole movement that led up to that, I really came away with the feeling that we're not at the end of something. Trump going out of office did not mark the end. We're at the beginning of something. I think Americans have never appreciated the fragility of democracy. And that's why I find your book so appealing. I think we just assume after 200 years, this is the natural state of things. It's always going to be like this. That's not true. Democracy requires constant work because in many ways, as I suggested earlier, I think it's unnatural. It's not, people have always wanted strong rulers. Now we're trying to break away from that, but it's very difficult. So I see the movement that Trump started in the United States as very potent. And I think you had a great sentence to define it very simply. It's the kind of movement that motivates huge numbers of people to act against their own interests. And that is the perfect success of this movement. They appear to be ordinary people who are just fed up with the swamp, but they're actually promoted by the swamp itself, which is a very clever institution and knows what's the facade it needs to show in order to attract mass support. So I'm not so optimistic that we're moving on the path from Trump, then we got Biden. Next thing it's going to be Bernie Sanders, and we're going to be moving into a more progressive and open-minded era. I fear that we may be going in the other direction, and maybe Turkey in some ways will be a negative inspiration for us.
That's why I reversed Hannah Arendt's term, banality of evil to evil of banality, because the banal actually can create a lot of evil. Normal people can create a lot of evil. Ordinary people, sorry, not normal. Yeah. So
let me ask you this now. I practiced journalism in Turkey. You did too. In fact, you were one of the first people at the start of what turned out to be quite a flood that had to leave. You were among the very first. Is there a role for journalism in Turkey? We have now various websites like Aval and others that are outside of Turkey covering Turkish issues. Does journalism, perhaps internet journalism, have a role in creating a counter movement or a counter culture that can produce some kind of an alternative to what the governing system is now?
Well, not soon enough, I would say, because internet, when we say internet, we think of an agora, like as if everybody is equal, everybody goes there and talk and so on. It's not like that. There are thousands of websites that are banned in Turkey. Internet is in the hands of the political power. And also, we are all very active on Twitter because that's the only place we talk, or Facebook or Instagram, whatever. But these are companies, and these companies are now under pressure. These are not public places, so to speak. These are private gardens of some, corporation. So I do not think that it would make a, drastic difference, internet journalism. Yet again, I am extremely proud of my colleagues in Turkey who are still doing their job in Turkey under extremely, very difficult conditions. But it would be very, very exciting to imagine a new internet. I know this sounds a little bit fantastical, but a new internet that doesn't really belong to anyone, a new social media that doesn't belong to anyone, and so on. But still, it is the only place in Turkey at the moment that we can do journalism, we can consume journalism, whatever, we can read things. So yeah, it still makes a difference, but not as powerful as it was once when we had the newspapers and so on, or the televisions, because I think 80% of the people in Turkey, more than 80% of the people in Turkey are still getting their news from televisions, which are either owned or influenced by the government.
So given all of this, do you see, I'm thinking about the end of the Erdogan era. How can it come? Do you see the prospect of a victory in the next election of the İmamoğlu movement? If not, how and when do you imagine Turkey beginning to evolve so that I can go back and have lunch with Osman Kavala again?
Oh my God, Osman is a friend of mine, and Ayşe as well, his wife. Osman has been in prison for more than 4 years now for simply nothing. Yeah, just, I wasn't expecting to hear his name. Okay, this is what I imagine, because this happened during the municipality elections. It is obvious by now, it became obvious by now that Mr. Erdogan is not willing to lose an election. He will not be in the opposition in that, if you put it that way, because you know that he's actually fighting for his life on national and international level.
Absolutely.
So he won't be willing to participate in an election where there is a chance of losing. But this is what happened in Istanbul municipality election as well. For those of you who do not know what happened, Istanbul municipality is the biggest municipality, and it is traditionally known as the stepping stone to be the prime minister. So AKP, the governing party, lost the election. So Mr. Erdogan simply renewed the election, and these elections were were repeated. And Mr. İmamoğlu won it for the second time. So this is what I'm imagining. And that the second time when people, and it was the summertime, so people were in their vacation, spots, whatever, and there was a massive run back to Istanbul to vote. So it was actually civil action. It was a massive resistance movement, let's say, in a very peaceful way. You didn't count our votes, so we are voting again. And actually, İmamoğlu raised his winning percentage. So I'm expecting this, not expecting, but I'm wishing at least this to be happen. Of course, if the elections will take place, hopefully.
Her şey çok güzel olacak.
Inshallah.
This was İmamoğlu's motto.
Yeah, everything will be beautiful. Everything will be good.
And actually, I thought İmamoğlu had a very clever approach to the campaign. In Turkey, political campaigns are normally conducted by shouting, and you want to be tougher than the other guy and beat your chest. He didn't do that. He seemed not only to be providing an alternative ideologically, but a whole new political culture that's not based on that traditional Turkish politics. But I've always felt that the people that I would like to see as Prime Minister of Turkey are never going to be elected. I still remember a dinner I had with one leading Turkish politician, and I told him, "You're never going to be Prime Minister because you're the kind of person I would vote for. And the kind of person I would like cannot survive in this political environment." So that, if I'm right, that requires a change in political environment. And that seems to me to be something that's a long-term project.
Well, Stephen, the other day I wrote something like, if we are lucky enough, we're going to be ashamed of ourselves a lot in the future. I think there will be, if we can pass this period, if we can end up in a better period, the first thing that Turkey will go through will be a moral cleansing. Because authoritarian regimes is not only about politics, they also corrupt the morality of a country as well. The might rules, and the might, not the right, becomes the motto. And also corruption on several levels has become the rule as well. So I think even on individual level, among the communities, people will be very ashamed of themselves. Hopefully we will see that if you're lucky enough, as I said. I think İmamoğlu or such politicians in other countries who are doing similar things, which is to say, being embracing, being compassionate, and talking about human love or togetherness and so on. I think what they are doing is trying to heal the polarization to start with that has been induced by authoritarian regimes. And hopefully we're lucky enough to experience that moment of reconciliation after this extreme polarization in the country. We'll see. It's not easy to make guesses or foresee the future for Turkey, as you very well know. Anything can happen anytime. So
we had a famous American baseball philosopher, Yogi Berra, who used to say, "It's hard to make predictions, especially about the future."
Yeah, exactly. Especially about the Turkish future, I should say.
Esra, is there someone else waiting?
Yeah, I actually saw Serap Frank raising her hand. Serap, do you want to ask a question, or can we just continue? No. Let me unmute you. Yeah, okay.
Okay, sorry, I'm joining from work, but what I wanted to ask was, one of the most important thing is today not educating the educated, but also investing on the uneducated. And I think that's one of the problems of Turkey, where we have lost the ability to educate the smaller populations, and where the religion kind of moved into that empty space and started educating them, and we have lost that population support to a better future for Turkey, and that has been handed to the religion in smaller populations. So is there anything that you want to put in? I kind of joined in a little late, and that's why I was a little bit scared of raising my hand, and you might have already covered this portion of it, but if you haven't, what do you think about educating the smaller villages and trying to rescue them from the clutches of the religion?
It's a very complicated matter, actually, and it takes a lot of, we should talk about a lot about near history of Turkey, especially the Cold War era and so on. They were, well, to start with, if you know about Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, they were very active on health sector, and also education. This is what happened with AKP as well. But before that, there was the Fethullah Gülen movement. Now, the leader of the movement is residing in Pennsylvania. And Fethullah Gülen movement dates back to 1960s, actually. And then after 1980s, after the coup d'etat, as opposed to the popular knowledge, Fethullah Gülen movement was supported by the army, and they were pretty much favored by the regime. So, and that was due to the Cold War and so on. So it takes generations. When you talk about education, it takes generations. So you might as well know, because I see that you're from Turkey, Mr. Erdogan and his generation was known to be the golden generation of the Islamist movement, which Fethullah Gülen movement was a big part of. But what you asked me now reminds me Latin America. there is this missionary dedication, so to speak, among the Latin American left, and Stephen would know this better than me. I think in Turkey, we lacked that culture within the socialist and progressive people, that missionary dedication to small matters of life. It is a different culture, and we didn't really adopt it, I think. Or when we tried to adopt it, the progressives of Turkey tried to adopt it, there were the coups, you know, they were killed and tortured and so on. But education is now a extremely polarized and politicized matter in Turkey. Because when you talk about girls' education, the Kurdish people can tell you that they are, you know, this kind of education assimilating the Kurdish people, Kurdish kids. Or when you talk about, you know, secular education, people say that we have the freedom of choosing our way of life, so on and so forth. In such a polarized country, the unity of education is extremely, you know, it is disintegrated. It has disintegrated in Turkey. So we have to have a unity again, I think, but that is only after the political change, I would say.
Yeah, so you don't foresee anything before a political change can happen?
Well, you know,
Okay, thank you.
It is a big danger to mix your wishes with your observations. So I don't want to do that, because right now the reality in Turkey is that the upper middle class is trying to find a way to send their kids abroad. And the middle class is trying to survive in this Islamized, authoritarian education system. So, and the lower class, the working people, working class has no chance but to send their kids to these schools, unless they are from different religious groups or ethnicities or whatever. So this is the reality, and it's not a pretty reality, as you can see. So the only thing can come from the political change, and overall political change, I would say, and Stephen was quite right. It's not only changing of the, you know, government, it is the changing of the political culture and social environment as well.
Well, it's not such an encouraging way to finish, but I would just say that we, among the very few beneficiaries of the process you're describing, is Brown University, because we get some of the most spectacular students from Turkey. And if situation was better in Turkey, we wouldn't be getting those students. So all those people that would be at Boğaziçi, now they're trying to come to Brown, and it's greatly enriching for us. So I sympathize, but I have to tell you that your loss is our gain.
Well, Stephen, it is very interesting. I think there should be an academic work on this, because there is a growing diaspora of Turkish people, intellectual Turkish people, or, you know, well-educated Turkish people in Europe and the United States. We are going through this process in a different manner than the Iranians did or the Syrians did, because they had this dramatic change in their political sphere, and everybody watched it, and it was like it happened in a through a drastic through drastic events, and everybody knew, and they themselves knew, that there is no going back, and they are the diaspora. But Turkish diaspora is kind of elusive. It is growing in silence and so on. But there is actually a Turkish diaspora, a new Turkish diaspora right now. I think academics will have a new area for research because of that. And it is not easy to admit this for them either. It's not even easy to admit it for me, that there might not be going back. So yeah.
Well, I lived through the period, as you did, in the early 2000s, when Turkey was the coming thing in the world. There were articles in Vanity Fair about how Turkey was the coolest place ever. And it seemed to evaporate so quickly. I truly believe it's a lesson for Americans And I wish more of us would focus on the kinds of comparisons that you're making and not try to brush off what's happening in countries like Turkey as something that happens in places where democracy is not well enough developed or people are not sophisticated enough. That is not correct. The same forces that created the crisis in Turkey are very much at work in the United States.
And the similarities are so striking that Turkish Twitter users are actually noticing them and making jokes about them. And then I see the American Twitter users, the progressives or the opposing people, and they're making the same jokes that we did in 2010, 2012. So it was the beginning of, down the hill process for Turkey. So yeah, and by the way, before How to Lose a Country, I wrote this book about Turkey, the Insane and the Melancholy, and it was such a coincidence that the publication date of the book coincided with the 2016 coup attempt. So I gave several speeches in Britain and in the United States. And in 2016, I remember very well, Trump came to power. And I remember Americans saying this. And there were several articles about this. Trump cannot last more than a year. And then a year passed. The second year, it was all about jokes, about Trump making it because these making jokes feel like as long as I can laugh at it, nothing would happen to me, kind of. It gives this illusion of security, I think. And the third year, they were talking about impeachment. And the fourth year, people were talking about what if Trump's stays in power? What if there's a coup and so on? So that speed of changing things in Turkey actually happened in the United States and is still happening, if you ask me. That's why I want people to read How to Lose a Country, not because I want to sell my book, but because this is a global matter and we can only overcome this global problem by global solidarity with these talks that we are doing now. So because one of the things that we felt most in Turkey was loneliness. We thought we are the only people this madness is happening to, this insanity. And I saw Americans and British people going through the same loneliness, like what's happening to us. They couldn't understand. They were almost paralyzed politically and mentally and so on. And I know that happened in Turkey, so I don't want any other nation to go through the same steps. People ask me do you feel like schadenfreude somehow when you see Trump, or when you see that what you have told in the book comes true? Do you feel that pleasure? No, I don't. I don't even smile bitterly. I just feel the pain of those people because I know it's horrible. It's literally like losing your country, and losing a country is not a light matter. It's losing a home. So yeah. Well,
you at this point can look back from seeing how far down Turkey has fallen, and you're able to point out, as you just mentioned, the phrase, you can pinpoint the beginning of the path down. We aren't at that stage yet, but I wonder if the United States continues on this negative path, will there be a moment when finally we, like you're doing now, will look back and say, when did the path down begin? And it might be right around now.
Actually, you know what? When it began for the United States, not when Trump came to power. Do you remember the time when he said, we're going to attack Syria? And I remember Farid Zakaria and several people, mainstream journalists saying this, now Trump became the president of the United States.
Right.
That is the point where where return is really difficult. That is the point. That is the legitimization of this absurdity. That is the point where down the hill begins.
Well, you can move it further back. What about the invasion of Iraq? And what about our interventions in so many other countries? To try to find the beginning of this process, you really have to go deep in history.
Yeah, Yeah, that would be a good topic to talk about for like a 2 hours webinar, I think.
Well, we've had an hour and a half of this one. It's been tremendously informative, and I'm sure everybody else that was listening had the same reaction. It was an honor for me to be part of this. And thank you, Esra, for inviting me.
Stephen, it's, feelings are mutual. That's my honor, actually. Thank you for hosting this event. And it was really invigorating, refreshing for me. And it's really an honor to be hosted by a legend. Thank you. Really.
When I get confirmation from Ece Temelkuran, I really want to again thank you, Ece Hanım, for accepting the invitation. The first person that went through my mind was obviously Professor Kinzer, because I thought this would be a very good team. And now we're seeing that it has actually happened. We actually have a couple of questions from people if you would like to answer those. So Ms. Canover, I guess if I'm not mispronouncing your surname, go ahead, please. We cannot hear you now.
I gotta unmute. Okay. I have been thinking about my friends in Taiwan. About the middle of the summer, I started sending a lot of little messages, finding out how they were. And I finally heard from 2 of my friends about how lonely they are, how they feel like nobody in the world is paying attention to the threat to Taiwan. And their government is trying to stay strong, but it's a very scary thing for them. And as you talked about the loneliness of people in Turkey, knowing that this change is happening, this is what's happening to the people in Taiwan now. This is a woman who's a high school history teacher. Her husband has a business and they have small children, and they lived in Rhode Island, where I live, for a year, and that's how I got to know her. And I feel like there's places all over the world now that are going through this very aware time of, oh my God, there's big changes happening and my country is under threat.
Exactly. And now once there was the moral high ground of Europe, and they were supposed to help the rest of the world or United States, whatever. But now, since quite a while, there is no moral high ground, and neither the means to help. And everybody's plate is so full with pandemic and the deepening social problems due to pandemic. So yeah, I'm sure there are many communities in countries all over the world, especially in Africa, who feel the same thing. You're right. Thank you for the input.
I think loneliness is a global phenomenon right now because of the pandemic.
That's it. Yeah, you're right. I should write something about that. Loneliness. That's a good idea. Thank you for the idea.
You're welcome.
I think did I see someone else raising their hand? No. If you don't mind, I also have a question for you. So I'm a pretty good reader of your books, and I really, as I said, I really enjoyed this book that we're talking about. Seriously, it was an eye-opener for me, particularly when I was watching what happened in the Capitol, after the elections. So then I started watching videos about the book and about those concepts that you were talking about, and you define right-wing populism as part of neoliberalism, and you kind of like emphasize that a lot. So I'd like to ask you a question. So if we don't kind of like get rid of this whole neoliberal system, wouldn't there be a way out of this? Do we need to change the whole, because when we talk about neoliberalism, what I understand is it's directly related to the economic policies of the world as well. So
not only, but mainly, yes. But what is important is to notice the current state of neoliberalism is even criticized by the stronghold of this ideology of the system. In Davos in 2014, if I'm not wrong, Davos is the castle of this ideology. And they even said that we cannot go on like this. And it is not because of authoritarianism that we have to change something in the way we live, but also because of climate crisis, because of the bankruptcy of the nature. We cannot go on like this, and we all know this. It is the fact, the only problem, not the only, but the most important problem is that we somehow are so convinced that this is our natural state, that imagining the end of the world somehow seems easier to us than imagining neoliberalism, which is not even ironic, it is horrible. So yeah, I do think that right-wing populism and authoritarianism is the mutant child of neoliberal ideology, because there was this understanding, there was this imposed idea all around the world almost, saying that authoritarianism can only come from communism, whereas we know that it is not the case. We are seeing it now, we are experiencing it. So that all that Cold War, set up, all that, perception of neoliberalism as our natural state should go, and is going actually now. That is why we are seeing all these morbid symptoms, as Gramsci once said, because the old is dead and the new is not born yet. We lost our, faith in the system. The majority lost its faith in the system because it didn't trickle down. The rich didn't trickle, richness, the capital did not trickle down. It is concentrated at the top, and that's why it's not working. In 70s, in 60s, countries were still, there was still capitalism and so on. But social democracy, social justice was still integral part of democracy. That was why it was flourishing. That was why there was the zeitgeist was completely different.
Thank you very much for your answer. It's now 1:30, and Professor Kinzer, I think we can wrap it up. Would you like to ask one final question, or should we just end the meeting?
Well, one thing we didn't touch on is something that one of your questioners mentioned. She talked about the importance of trying to rescue a new generation from the clutches of religion. Do you think that secular Turks have, over the years, scorned and looked down on their religious brothers and sisters and thought of them as kind of backward and undeveloped and primitive? And this might have led to the angry backlash that is part of the Erdogan phenomenon?
I think the paradigm should be perceived differently. The paradigm is different. It is not religious versus secular. It is rather obedient versus disobedient, because among the staunch supporters of Erdogan, there are transsexuals. There are, unfit, what do you call it? People without faith. They are not all religious people. It is about obedience. The leader asks from us in authoritarian systems not to be religious or this or that. The only thing he asks from us is obedience. So even if you are extremely religious, and there are those people in Turkey, if you're not obedient, you are not part of the system, and you are the second-class citizen. You are the enemy of the state, and so on. We are experiencing that in Turkey as well. So I think the manufactured crisis, of course, it was a fragile consensus. We all know that, secularism and Islam and so on. But the dramatic side of it is quite manufactured, I think. So today, for instance, there are a lot of women who are religious and who identify themselves as Muslims, who wear headscarves, who are against the government because the government, Mr. Erdogan, by an overnight decree, pulled out from Istanbul Convention. So I think it's not about religion, it's about obedience. And those people who are not obedient know each other, be it religious or not, and they stand together. And we see that during Boğaziçi resistance lately, and also Istanbul Convention resistance.
Okay, I think we're done at this point. I would like to once again thank you, Ece Hanım. You know what, I was just thinking, since now you're going to have your new book in May and COVID is about to hopefully over, so maybe we'll have you in at Brown University in person.
That would be lovely. I'd love that. Actually.
Yeah, that would be so good to have you in person.
Only if Professor Kinzer chairs me.
Well, I could do it, and actually, you'd actually be able to see my face.
That would be really.
I think we should, yeah, I think we should work on that, and that would be very good for all of us. Okay, so it was so nice to have you all.
Thank you very much for organizing this, and thank you again, Stephen. And it was lovely, really, talking to all of you.
Professor Kinzer, thank you so much for hosting and asking those important questions. And thank you everyone for being here. I have received a lot of messages, by the way. Now you have new readers, and they want me to pass their highs to you. So we'll see. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Çok teşekkürler.
Görüşmek üzere.
Hoşça kalın.